So I would argue that the discussion to have today is about co-creating the future of education. I would say that right now we are entering the dawn of a new era in education. And this is a great thing. And it is not necessarily due to COVID, because change is at the very essence of life. And instead of resisting it, we are invited to embrace it in whatever form it may come. Now, if we take a closer look at what is happening actually, there's always a race between technology and skills. And technology seems to be always faster. We have seen, for example, this case also when the Industrial Revolution happened, technology went faster and education skills were lagging behind. And this, of course, will always give birth to a big social pain. Now, the good thing with this is that that is what triggers also innovation. So the bigger the social pain, the more incentivized we are to actually figure out solutions to these problems and challenges and move forward. And the really wonderful thing is that then the innovation in terms of education or skills actually surpasses the development of technology. And for some time, we are in this situation of so-called prosperity. The same has happened also with digitalization and is happening right now. And it is true that we are right in the middle of this social pain. And I would argue that COVID is basically just a little accelerating particle. The trend was already there. And now the question is, what's going to happen next? We've seen for the past years already an acceleration of trends that have been building. We have seen this increased need for better learning to earning paths for students. And we see already today that universities are taking very good steps in order to become more aligned with the skills really needed by our world. Or we've seen online first pedagogy emerging and becoming some sort of a new normal. By online first pedagogy, I do not mean taking more of the same and digitalizing it, but slowly and surely coming up with hybrid models that truly make sense and are, on one hand, learner-centric and match the real needs of our world. And as we've seen, and especially now, universities start investing more and more in high quality production of interactive and engaging digital learning experiences that can be made accessible to all. Another trend would be that accreditation from a single university is no longer enough out there. And in the future, we can imagine that students will curate Spotify-like playlists with adaptive didactical materials connecting with teachers and peers around the world. So it's fair enough to ask what is really happening. And when we are looking at the global work situation, it's very clear that this labor deficit is currently increasing, and there are no signs that this is going to stop. In fact, by 2030, a global shortage of skilled talent is projected to result in $8.5 trillion loss in foregone annual revenues. At the same time, over 50% of the 1 billion global knowledge workers are projected to need upskilling or retraining to avoid being pushed into under or unemployment. So the demand for the new skills and training is therefore huge, and the current education and training system will not be able to cope with it as it is. So what is needed? And one could argue that there are three core areas that we should have a closer look at. And then the more we look at them, the more we realize that mobility is that one common denominator, that one factor that can actually help on all these three levels. The current education system is actually not scalable enough because it's taken more than 200 years to build universities in the way we have them today. And in the next 10 years, we are looking to double the number of university enrollments. So to meet this demand, we cannot simply just double the number of buildings, of university buildings, or continue creating many new universities following the same traditional model. It simply will not work. So we are invited to come up with new models. The system is also not flexible enough because when we think of higher education today, we usually picture students who can spend at least 3 years full-time on residential courses. But the reality is that already today, around 40% of learners don't really fit into this model, as they may be already either working part-time or full-time. It is important for education to start offering more flexible, less financially risky pathways to meet the needs of the new generation of students. And this is where mobility, online, offline, becomes incredibly important. And when we look at skills, we could argue that the system could become better aligned to what is needed out there in the world. Because the system we have today is rather education-centric and not employer-centric, for example. Courses are designed with educational objectives in mind, and sometimes these do not consider real-life employer needs. And things are changing very fast. So the time has come also to move beyond a linear approach to education and to work. So coming back to the question, what is the future of higher education? And this is where it's important to talk about how do we look at the future. And it's in our nature to, of course, have a preferable or probable or projected future, and maybe not go too much into something that seems impossible or something that will never happen. And it's absolutely normal. When we look at experts who are looking into forecasting and foresight, they argue that at any point in time, and this is Jim Dater, there are 4 generic futures that are possible. So it's also a question of whenever we start designing or thinking about solutions, also understanding in which of these futures do we want to play. There's the growth scenario, and this is something that, of course, the economy likes very much because there's never-ending growth. Then there can be a more disciplined future and a disciplined scenario. And it's enough to look at countries like China to understand what it is all about. There's, of course, the very catastrophic scenario of collapse. So something happens and everything changes from one day to the other. But then there's the interesting 4th scenario of transformation. And I truly believe that we are at the point where we can fully embrace this archetype. I would argue that the current pandemic is a game changer because it really creates this opportunity to make transformational change happen. So welcome to the transformational future. Which are the driving forces of this future? Co-creation, collaboration, and this is why summits like the one you have organized and you're having today are going to become more and more important because it's a question of next generation collaboration between all stakeholders when it comes to empowering mobility, which is going to be fundamental for this transformational future, it will only be possible to work on new models and to figure out long-term solutions through sustained increased collaboration between organizations such as yourself. Then a driving major force is this learner centricity, where learning outcomes are all about designing for work and life integration and work-life paths. It's no longer a question, now I'm doing my education and then I'm going to have some counseling on which job to take and then we will see. And this emphasis on lifelong learning is going to become increasingly important in the future. Then with digitalization, we are at a stage where we are challenged to look beyond just taking the old and transforming it into something that can be accessible online. This is something that I would like to call in real life plus. And this has to do with using technology and using get-together, so finding the balance between online and offline to create truly engaging learning experiences and using emerging technology. And I'll say that this is where also something really exciting is up and coming, because emerging technology allows us today to create better engaging experiences, and it can allow also for virtual mobility to become something that is truly standing out. I will not have enough time to walk you through emerging technology today, but of course, when we look, for example, at what we are doing at Taskbase, it's about using artificial intelligence and didactical experts in order to provide advanced formative feedback at scale. There are other edtech companies like Labster who have designed virtual science labs, making it possible for students around the world to immerse themselves in a science lab and become excited about STEM education. And then there's, as a result also of the pandemic, we are seeing the birth of new tools that make communication and coming together more exciting. And one of such companies has a special name. It is really called And this is about next generation online presentations. So how do we will get there to the next level? What does it take to transform education? And there are a few engines of opportunity, because we will have to match, as said, in the end, people with the real world needs. And access to talent is going to be increasingly important, as well as access to opportunity. And as you can imagine, this is all about mobility. So in terms of engines of opportunity, one could talk about disruptors on one hand. So these are all new models that are also coming from the edtech world and startups, and can be very creative, disruptive ideas. And on the other side, we are talking about enablers. And this is where I would say your role is incredibly important, because this is about bringing people together and ensuring that there's a stronger collaboration between universities, between students, between teachers, so that operating systems for teaching and learning at scale can be co-created. And at the same time, as we've seen, it's not going to be possible to have the same model of building universities with the same recipe we've had in the past. So it's a question of understanding how to help university enter new markets in creative ways. There's many examples out there of startups or edtech companies that are taking a closer look and trying to understand how to support going in this direction. One of them I would just give today an example is Aula. So they are looking at how to better the digital learning experience of students. And it is very inspiring to see what they are doing. So how do we go about creating all these new models that are needed? For me, the first and most important thing is the mindset. And this is about, as discussed before, embracing challenges as opportunities. Innovation will always try to figure out creative solutions to problems. Because if we focus too much on the problems, this is not going to be possible. Then it's about creating safe spaces to experiment and bringing people together. And this is where you could act as true leaders and enablers in that sense. And last but not least, it's really a question of prototyping and iterating, because there is no one single recipe to get to the next level. And when we are talking about change, the question that keeps coming is, how do we organize ourselves? Because it's one thing on the solutions we have to create and push mobility forward, but then how do we as an organization come up maybe with new operating models? And there I would say that truly transformative organizations today are moving towards what Frederic Laloux calls Teal level in his reinventing organizations model. And the Teal level organizations replace hierarchical pyramids, and they are seen as living entities oriented towards realizing their potential. So they are more like living organisms. And it's all about wholeness and evolutionary purpose and also self-management. And this is a big step for many traditional organizations out there, but it's out there, it has been done, and there are by now enough case studies and good practice that one can look at and understand how do we move from one level to the other. And of course, it starts with this change of mindset. And this is one of my favorite quotes from Einstein, who said that no problem can be solved from the same level of consciousness that created it. So it's about opening up to the realm of opportunities and not fearing. So not having the pressure of what if I fail, what happens, how do I look? So it's really about opening up and inviting completely new thinking and doing into daily lives. It's easier to say than to do, for sure. But then I would say that there are ways to go there, because on one hand, the inspiration already now today is limitless. And one can get inspired by complex systems that are already very successful, perhaps in another field, another area. And I've just put up a picture of GitHub here. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but this is basically a platform where 65 million developers and 3 million organizations come together in order to build and to ship and to maintain their software. And I'd say this is a very inspiring example on how to collaborate, especially when, let's say, it's a question of getting as many people as possible together. And also there may be also the online versus offline discussion. I would say there are really good examples out there, and it would be a pity to reinvent the wheel and not to look at what they are doing and how this is done. And then there's also things like, for example, biomimicry and biomimicry thinking, because this is about embracing change and it is about managing complex systems. And nature has a lot to teach us in how to do so. So I would say that the time is really ripe for entering a transformational future. And I would encourage you to just press start. Do not be afraid. because we are natural born leaders, and together we can make things happen. Thank you very much.